It's the 3rd of the month. Your paycheck just landed, and after bills, you've got $500 sitting there doing absolutely nothing, which for once is a good problem to have. You open 2 tabs. One is your credit card app. Balance $4,200 sitting at 22% interest, quietly getting worse every single day whether you look at it or not. The other is a brokerage app you downloaded 3 weeks ago and still haven't funded because you read somewhere that the stock market averages 10% a year, and 10% sounded like a number worth chasing. So you sit there, $500 burning a hole in your account, paralyzed by a question that sounds simple and is actually one of the most argued about topics in personal finance. Do you throw it at the debt or do you throw it at the market? Everyone in your life has an opinion. Your uncle says, pay off debt, debt-free is the only real freedom. Your coworker says, invest. Time in the market beats timing the market. Compound interest waits for no one. They can't both be right, and this is the part that annoyed me the first time I actually looked into it. They're not even really disagreeing about values. They're just doing different math, and one of them is usually doing it wrong. Here's what almost nobody tells you up front. This isn't a personality question. It's not about whether you're a debt-free person or an investor person. It's not a vibe. It's arithmetic, dressed up as a philosophy, and once you see the arithmetic, the decision mostly makes itself, with maybe 2 exceptions, which I'll get to, because exceptions are where people always get themselves in trouble. My name's Arthur, and I have spent an embarrassing number of evenings doing exactly this kind of math on my own finances instead of, say, sleeping. If you've ever stared at extra cash wondering where it should go, stick around, because by the end of this you'll have an actual rule, not a vibe, to run it through. And if any of this saves you from doing what I did, more on that later, it's not my proudest chapter. Go ahead and subscribe now, because we do a lot of this. Real numbers, not motivational nonsense. Let's start with the rule itself, because it's genuinely this simple. Compare the interest rate on your debt to the return you realistically expect from investing. Whichever number is bigger wins. That's it. That's the whole rule. Everything else is commentary. Here's why. If your credit card is charging you 22%, and the stock market has historically returned somewhere around 7 to 10% a year on average, and I want to be honest, on average is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Some years it's up 25%, some years it's down 20%. It is not a smooth, guaranteed line. Then paying off that debt is, functionally, a guaranteed 22% return. Nobody is guaranteeing you 22% in the market. Nobody is guaranteeing you anything in the market. But your credit card company is absolutely 100% contractually guaranteeing you 22% if you don't pay it off. So paying off a 22% credit card isn't the safe, boring choice, and investing isn't the smart, aggressive choice. Paying off the credit card usually is the smart, aggressive choice, mathematically, because you cannot find a legal investment that reliably beats a guaranteed 22%. Let's actually run the numbers, because vague comparisons are how people talk themselves into bad decisions. Say you've got that $4,200 balance at 22% APR, and you're deciding between throwing $500 a month at it versus investing that $500 a month instead. If you throw $500 a month at the debt, you clear that $4,200 in about 9 months, and you pay roughly $350 in total interest over that stretch. Not great, but contained. If instead you invest that $500 a month and only make minimum payments on the card, let's say those minimums run around $105 a month, it takes you closer to 4 years to pay off the same $4,200, and by the time you're done, you've paid over $2,100 in interest. Half the original balance again, in interest, for the privilege of investing while in debt. Meanwhile, that $500 a month you invested for those same 9 months, even at a solid 8% average return, 9 months of contributions comes to roughly $4,650 invested, growing to maybe $4,800 to $4,900 depending on the year. Which sounds fine, until you remember you just handed the credit card company an extra $1,750 in interest to get there. You didn't come out ahead. You came out behind by a lot, and you're carrying debt for 4 years instead of 9 months while you do it. This is the part that surprised me when I first actually sat down and did this math on paper instead of just going with my gut. High interest debt isn't competing with investing. It's beating it, comfortably, almost every single time. Now, before you go pull every dollar out of your investments to attack debt, there's one exception that isn't really an exception. It's closer to a cheat code. And it's the one thing basically every financial advisor, every finance YouTuber, every armchair uncle at Thanksgiving agrees on. Employer 401k matching. If your job matches your retirement contributions, say 50 cents for every dollar you put in up to a certain amount, that's an instant, guaranteed 50% return the moment you contribute. Not 50% a year. 50% immediately on day one, before the market even does anything. There's no debt on earth, not even a credit card at 29%, that beats a guaranteed instant 50% return. So the actual full rule is, grab the free match first, then run the interest rate comparison on everything else. Skipping a full employer match to aggressively pay down, say, a 6% student loan is one of the more common, quietly expensive mistakes people make, because it feels responsible and it's actually leaving free money on the table. Now I know some of you are already thinking, okay Arthur, but my debt isn't a 22% credit card. My student loans are at 5%. My mortgage is at 4%. What then? Great question, and this is exactly where the rule keeps working. It just points the other direction. If your debt is sitting at 4 to 6% and the market has historically averaged 7 to 10% over long periods, the math tips toward investing, not because debt magically became good, but because the guaranteed cost of carrying that debt is lower than the realistic expected return of your money working elsewhere. It's the exact same rule. The number just changed. This is also why paying off a mortgage early is one of the most emotionally satisfying and mathematically debatable moves in personal finance, because 4% debt is cheap debt, and cheap debt loses to almost anything invested consistently over quarter-century time frames. That doesn't mean paying off your mortgage early is wrong. It means it's a peace of mind decision more than a pure math decision, and it's worth being honest with yourself about which one you're actually making. The second real exception isn't about interest rates at all. It's about having zero cash buffer. If you have $4,200 in credit card debt and exactly $40 in your checking account, the math still says attack the high-interest debt. But the psychology says you need at least a small emergency cushion first, because the entire reason people end up back in credit card debt after paying it off is one unexpected $600 problem with absolutely nothing to cover it. So the honest, complete order of operations looks like this. Grab any employer match that's free money, build a small starter buffer, a few $100s, not 6 months of expenses, just enough that one bad week doesn't put you right back on the card. Then run the interest rate rule on everything else, debt versus investing, whichever number is bigger. Wins? Here's the part I'm only telling you because I think it's more useful than flattering. A while back, I was carrying a chunk of credit card debt at a rate I'm honestly a little embarrassed to say out loud, and at the same time, I was proudly, consistently dumping money into an investment account because investing felt like the responsible adult thing to do. It felt like progress. It felt like I was building something. And then I actually sat down and ran the numbers, the same numbers I just walked you through, and realized the debt was quietly costing me more every single month than my investments were making me. I was, in the most literal sense, paying to invest, losing money on the spread every month while feeling great about myself for doing it. Running your own numbers has a specific way of making you feel foolish that a lecture from someone else never quite manages, and I think that's exactly why it's worth doing instead of just trusting your gut. So here's the whole thing, one more time, cleanly. Step 1. If there's an employer match on the table, grab it. That's free money and it beats everything. Step 2, if you've got absolutely no cash, cushion, build a small one first, just enough to survive a bad week. Step 3, compare your debt's interest rate to your realistic expected investment return and send your extra money toward whichever number is bigger. High interest debt, 15% and up, almost always wins. Low interest debt, 4 to 6%, usually loses to consistent long-term investing. And notice what's missing from that list. Your personality, your feelings about debt, your uncle's opinion at Thanksgiving. None of that is in the formula because none of it changes the math. This was never actually a debate between two philosophies. It just got dressed up as one because people wanted a simpler story than check the interest rate and do arithmetic. But the arithmetic was always going to win, whether we admitted it or not. So here's your move. Pull up your actual debt, find the actual interest rate, and compare it to a realistic long-term return. Call it 7 to 8%, not the best year the market ever had. Whichever number is bigger tells you exactly where your next extra dollar should go. Not your gut. not your uncle, the number. If this changed how you think about that $500 sitting in your account right now, subscribe. See you in the next one.